As we go through Savitri, we realize that there are two obvious long sections on yoga. One, the Aswapati's yoga, and the other, Savitri's yoga. But then in addition to these two, there is also interspersed throughout the epic guidance to the common man about how to walk the path of yoga. So in that sense, Savitri in fact has three yogas: Aswapati's yoga, Savitri's yoga, and the common man's yoga or the ordinary man's yoga. And in a way, all three of these go beyond the traditional yogas. Aswapati completes the traditional yogas by the end of book 2 and has gone as far as possibly anybody has in the quest of personal salvation through yoga. But then he doesn't stop there. In book 3, he goes on to plead with the Divine Mother to make it possible for humanity at large to rise to a high level of consciousness, to the level of consciousness to which he has himself been able to rise, and eventually succeeds in securing from the Divine Mother a boon that this would actually happen. Savitri's yoga, again, after going up to the level of the overmental to which the traditional yogas have generally gone, Savitri goes to the level of nirvana, the absolute negative, which the Buddha emphasized, and then she succeeds in breaking through that golden lid of the absolute negative and reaches the supramental level. And in that sense, Savitri's yoga also goes beyond the traditional yogas. And when it comes to the common man's yoga, again, it is a unique yoga in the sense that it does not have anything clearly outlined in terms of techniques and procedures required for sadhana. The main thing emphasized is the psycho-spiritual transformation by bringing the psychic being forwards and depending upon the divine grace for an descent of the divine influence into man, so that the ascent of consciousness through the human effort meets the descent of the divine force into the person, and that completes the process. And in fact, divine grace has been given a lot more importance than human effort. So in that sense, by not really having a clear-cut guideline about what to do, what not to do, and which techniques would take the person there, the path has essentially been left to the individual seeker. And while no technique is really prescribed, at the same time no technique has been proscribed either, because we do find elaborate guidance about how to meditate and how the chakras may be opened and what happens when these chakras open up one by one. All that is there in Savitri. But at the same time, none of these methods has been really expressly recommended for the common man for his yoga, and in that sense all the three yogas in Savitri goes beyond the traditional yogas. In this session we shall have a close look only at Aswapati's yoga. Now Aswapati's yoga, which occupies in the legend of Savitri in the Mahabharata just 10 lines, expands to about 10,000 lines in Sri Aurobindo's Savitri, starting with book 1 canto 3 through the remaining cantos, that is up to canto 5 of book 1, all of the 15 cantos of book 2 and all of the 4 cantos of book 3, which makes up a total of 22 cantos, all this is devoted to Aswapati's yoga. Now in book 1, canto 3 through 5, we have a description of Aswapati's own psycho-spiritual transformation. And this transformation is a progressive process. It's not a one-time event. Gradually, the person finds it easier to bring the psychic being forwards and live a life which is based on the inner and deeper truth which lies inside all of us. And this inner discovery or inner change starts influencing outer life. So this progressive character of the psycho-spiritual transformation is what Sri Aurobindo talks about in these few lines on page 26. As he grew into his larger self, humanity framed his movements less and less. So as he grew into his larger new self, based on this, as a result of this psycho-spiritual transformation, humanity framed his movements less and less. He started behaving less and less like an ordinary human being. The ordinary humanity, the limitations and the framework of ordinary humanity defined his movements, defined his activities, defined his actions less and less. And instead what happened? A greater being saw a greater world. A fearless will for knowledge dared to erase the lines of safety reason draws that bar minds soar. Souls dive into the infinite. So he started overcoming the ordinary limitations of the mind. As a result of this progressive psycho-spiritual transformation, he acquired a fearless will of knowledge which could dare to go beyond the ordinary. It had no hesitation in erasing the lines of safety that normally reason draws, and it did away with the bar, that limitation, that obstacle to the mind soaring high, or the obstacle to the souls diving into the infinite. So as he was going through this progressive process, he reached the ultimate. But at the same time, while this process of psycho-spiritual transformation is going on and a person reaches a high level and gets glimpses of the deeper truths of existence, the basic human nature does not necessarily change completely, and therefore there is often a tendency to slide down to the mental level. And this is a proper process that happens to each one of us, and therefore this is an important guideline for the ordinary man's yoga. Sri Aurobindo talks about this process of sliding down while being on this path in these few lines on page 34. An old pull of subconscious cords renews, it draws the unwilling spirit from the heights, or a dull gravitation drags us down to the blind driven inertia of our base. So going back to our ordinary consciousness, the old pull that keeps pulling us down like gravity, and we tend to be drawn to the inertia of our base. The inconscient, the base is full of inertia, and we get drawn to it. And if not that, it may be at least the ordinary mental level to which we get drawn, and that happens quite often because a person makes a choice at the level of the psychic being, which involves loving, caring, sharing and compassion and so on, and then after some time he starts questioning himself, did I do the right thing or was I just being stupid? Because through such choices we ends up losing so much that he goes into those mental calculations of ordinary gain and loss, of worldly gain and loss, and when he does that he finds that he has lost so much by making that choice, and he starts having doubts whether he really did the right thing. Although a decision that he took in the past from that high level of consciousness, from the level of the psychic being, is never wrong, but he starts having doubts because of this tendency to slide down. But then this also has a positive side to it, as Sri Aurobindo goes on in the next two lines. This too, that is this getting pulled down through this gravitational pull of the subconscious cords, this too the supreme diplomat can use. Called the divine essence within us, the supreme diplomat. How is it a diplomat? It's a diplomat in the sense that it doesn't really say no. It never says no to the mental level. It gives us that free will, lets us do whatever we want. So like a diplomat, it never really says clearly a no, but at the same time it continues to haunt us, which means like a good diplomat, it doesn't say no, at the same time it continues to insist and persist in different ways. So this too, this pull too, the supreme diplomat can use. He makes our fall a means for greater rise. So through these falls, once we realize that we are having this tendency to fall, that only strengthens the resolve of the sincere seeker. He aspires even harder and more intensely and more sincerely not to fall again. So, the supreme diplomat can use this fall also as a means for greater rise. Now, what are the types of experiences that one may have as a result of this psycho-spiritual transformation? The person goes to a level where he gets experiences which are beyond the ordinary senses, beyond what we can normally see and hear. These extrasensory experiences are what we have what are commonly called the mystic consciousness, and the core of this is the universal presence of a supernatural power, the universal presence of the divine in all creation, animate and inanimate, and also beyond all creation. So, that is the essence of it, and we find this described in a few beautiful lines on page 28. He lived in the mystic space where thought is born and will is nursed by an ethereal power, and fed on the white milk of the eternal strengths till it grows into the likeness of a god. So, now he was no longer in the mental space, he was in the mystic space where thought is born. The thought is not born in the brain, the thought comes to us from that universal consciousness, and that is where he was living now. And will is nursed by an ethereal power. The will again does not arise in our brain, the will comes from that ethereal power, and it is that space that the mystic Aswapati here was inhabiting, and fed on the white milk of the eternal strengths. And what was the source of his strength, of these of this mystic consciousness? The white milk, the pure milk, the unadulterated milk of the eternal strength, the strength of the infinite, the strength of the absolute, the strength of the divine, till it grows into the likeness of a god. And this process of living in that space and experiencing it continues till the human being grows into the likeness of a god. And then a few more lines, a couple of pages later, on page 30. Inaudible to our deaf mortal ears, the wide world rhythms wove their stupendous chant, to which life strives to fit our rhyme beats here, melting our limits in the illimitable, turning the finite to infinity. So, this is the overcoming, complete overcoming of the ordinary limitations. As the limits melt, the person has access to the illimitable, and the finite starts turning into infinite, because the infinite resides within the finite. And during these states of mystic consciousness, the Rishi is often inspired with those ultimate words which we call the mantras, which give him words to express the ultimate reality, and he does not really have to compose these mantras like a poem, the words just come to him. And that process of the creation of a mantra is what Sri Aurobindo describes here on page 39. A reporter and scribe of hidden wisdom talk. So, the Rishi is just a reporter or a scribe. It's coming from somewhere else. A reporter and scribe of hidden wisdom talk, her shining minutes of celestial speech passed through the masked office of the occult mind. Transmitting gave to prophet and to seer the inspired body of the mystic truth. So, as a result of this inspiration that comes from the occult, the hidden source, that gives to the seer the inspired body of the mystic truth. The mystic truth is bodiless, but then it gets a body, acquires a body through these words. This is again a verse very similar to what we find in the Upanishads, that the spirit reveals its own body to the mystic. Now, what is the type of knowledge that the mystic gets through this consciousness? That is what forms the subject matter of Canto 4 in Book 1, the secret knowledge. And the Rishi realizes, the Rishi Aswapati here realizes our true identity, the true identity of a human being, and realizes that we are not a death-bound littleness, but what are we? We are a forgotten vastness. We are a vastness, but a vastness that has forgotten what it is. So, we live in an ignorance, but that doesn't wipe away our ultimate reality. Our ultimate reality remains that vastness, the vastness that the Brahman or the divine characterizes, but we have forgotten it. And we start identifying ourselves with the death-bound littleness, which actually we are not. And again, another Upanishadic verse describing the experience of the Rishi on page 66. The master of existence lurks in us and plays at hide and seek with his own force. In nature's instrument loiters secret God. So, the master of existence, the divine, lurks in us. He lurks in each one of us. And what does it do? It plays at hide and seek with its own force. It is there and yet it hides. It is responsible for the ignorance which we have, and that is why it is able to hide. But then it hides, at the same time it plants in us an urge to find it. So, the divine hides and we seek, and the divine enjoys this game of hide and seek. Now, this gives us the purpose of life. While the divine hides and gives us that ignorance which makes it so difficult for us to discover it, it also plants in us that urge to discover it, and that becomes the purpose of our life, because this urge is something which is unique to human beings, and therefore that defines the purpose of human life. And that is what Sri Aurobindo has expressed beautifully on page 67. A mutual debt binds man to the Supreme. His nature we must put on as he put ours. We are sons of God and must be even as he. His human portion we must grow divine. So, there is a mutual debt that binds man to the Supreme. His nature we must put on. We must put on the nature of the Supreme as he put ours. So, we must put on divine nature exactly as the divine has conceded or resigned or condescended to put on human nature. The divine itself has become human, and since it has condescended to limit itself, we are obliged to put on his nature. That is, as a human being, behave the way the divine would. So, the human portion of his, which is what we are, we must grow divine. So, that is the purpose of human life. So, book 1 is about Aswapati's psycho-spiritual transformation, and having reached the summit, now the yogi, the mystic, has access to those planes of consciousness of which we are not normally aware. And as a result, he becomes aware of all those worlds which we are completely ignorant about. We are conscious of only this particular world, maybe other planets and satellites which we can see through telescopes, but apart from that, we are not really conscious of the occult worlds which the mystic becomes conscious of, and that is the subject of book 2. So, Aswapati explores those different planes of consciousness, and while doing that, again we find plenty of guidance for the common man on how to practice yoga. The human predicament about being neither here nor there, that is, neither being completely divine nor being completely animal, which creates all the misery for man, is something that has been beautifully brought out on page 132. A power beyond earth's scope has touched the earth. The repose that might have been can be no more. A formless yearning passions in man's heart. A cry is in his blood for happier things. So, there is a great power beyond earth that has touched the earth, and the repose or the rest or the peace that could have been that of the creation on earth is something that is not the fate of man. Instead, what is his fate? A formless yearning passions in man's heart, a cry in his blood for happier things. Why? Because he is miserable. And why does that happen? Because he is not like an animal, he is not like a child. Else could he roam on a free sunlit soil, with the childlike pain-forgetting mind of beasts. If human beings had the pain-forgetting mind of animals or little children, then he could also roam on a free, sunlit soil, or live happy, unmoved like flowers and trees, or he could be happy like the plants. The might that came upon earth to bless has stayed on earth to suffer and aspire. But instead, in human beings, the might, the divine might that came on earth to bless the earth has stayed on in human beings to suffer and aspire. So that is the predicament of man. And what does man seek? He seeks the supramental, he seeks the summit of created things, and the mystic actually experiences it. And this experience of that level of consciousness is what we find at several places. One of them is on page 299, the bottom. Absolved from the ligaments of death and sleep, he rode the lightning seas of cosmic mind and crossed the ocean of original sound on the last step to the supernal birth. He trod along extinction's narrow edge near the high verges of eternity and mounted the gold ridge of the world dream between the slayer and savior fires. The belt is reached of the unchanging truth, met borders of the inexpressible light, and thrilled with the presence of the ineffable. So, once he has been absolved from the ligaments, that restraining influence of death and sleep which binds the ordinary man, he is able to climb to the summits and reaches the unchanging truth, and when he reaches there, he experiences the thrill of the ineffable. It's an ecstatic experience, and that is what Sri Aurobindo has described here. Now, having explored the different planes of consciousness and going through worlds, some of which are similar to earth, some much worse than earth, having levels of consciousness even lower than earth, and some levels of consciousness somewhat higher than earth, and some worlds which have a level of consciousness much higher than earth, similar to the vision Sri Aurobindo had of the supramental consciousness. So, having explored all these worlds which differ from earth in one important way, and that is that while their level of consciousness may be similar to earth, lower than earth or higher than earth, they are relatively uniform. They have a uniform, they are homogeneous. So, all the beings there have a certain level of consciousness, whereas on earth we have all extremes as well as an average. So, on earth, it's only on earth it seems that good and evil coexist. We have large numbers with what we may call the average level of consciousness, if there's anything like that, and at the same time we also have levels which are very low and levels which are extremely high, and a select few rise to levels of the mystic and the seer and climb to the higher realms where they become aware of this absolute reality, the all-pervasive presence of the divine. And of course, when we are talking about Sri Aurobindo, reaching those levels is not in itself what is important. What is important is the influence, is the way it can affect outer life. And when we are talking of Sri Aurobindo, we cannot talk about this entire process of psycho-spiritual transformation and climbing to these summits and these ecstatic spiritual experiences without talking about the effect of this inner change on outer life. And that is something which we find right in the beginning of this exploration in Book 1, Canto 4 on page 48. Invading from spiritual silences, a ray of the timeless glory stoops awhile to commune with our seized illumined clay and leaves its huge white stamp upon our lives. So, this invasion from the spiritual silences, that is getting access to those spaces which are normally inaccessible to us because of our ignorance, gaining access to those levels of consciousness allows a ray of the timeless glory to enter us. It stoops to human levels in a way by entering the human mold, and then it communes with our seized illumined clay. Our clay, the clay of which we are made, is no longer ordinary clay, it gets illumined. It gets illumined by that ray of light from the ultimate reality, from the divine. And what is its effect on this clay getting illumined? Leaves its huge white stamp upon our lives. It influences our lives, it changes our lives. Now, books 1 and 2 are, one might say, the end of all traditional yogas, in the sense that Aswapati has reached the summits and explored all the planes of consciousness, so his personal salvation is complete. But then he doesn't stop there. He aspires for the end of ignorance and its ensuing and the ensuing suffering and misery, which is the normal fate of human beings on earth. He aspires that that should come to an end. One should not have to wait to go to some other world, to some other heaven after death. One should be able to bring the heaven down on earth itself, so that the earth becomes similar to heaven, and that is what he aspires for. And in response to his sadhana, to his prayers, the Divine Mother does appear. And the Divine Mother tries to, in fact, dissuade him from aspiring for that sort of a change in the established order. And that's what we find here on page 341. The Divine Mother tells Aswapati, "My light shall be in thee, my strength thy force." So you should have available all the time my light and my strength. Let not the impatient titan drive thy heart, ask not the imperfect fruit the partial prize. You shall have all my light and strength, but do not be impatient to ask for something beyond your own personal salvation. Only one boon. Ask for only one boon. And what is that boon? To greaten thy spirit demand. Ask for the boon that thy spirit shall continue to greaten, continue to widen. Only one boon to greaten thy spirit demand. Only one joy to raise thy kind desire. Ask for one joy, that there may be more and more of your kind. Above blind fate and the antagonist powers, moveless there stands a high unchanging will. So, even above the blind fate, which seems to characterize life on earth, and the antagonist powers, that is the dualities of good and evil, above all this, there stands a high unchanging will, the will of the divine, and that is behind the current established order. To its omnipotence leave thy work's result. So the work that you have put in, leave the results of that to the omnipotent, to that omnipotent will, to that unchanging will. All things shall change in God's transfiguring hour. So things will change. What you want will happen, but it shall happen in God's time and in God's way. Don't be impatient to ask for it. To its omnipotence leave thy work's result. All things shall change in God's transfiguring hour. But Aswapati is impatient, and he pleads on the same page, 341, "How shall I rest content with mortal days and the dull measure of terrestrial things? I who have seen behind the cosmic mask the glory and the beauty of thy face. Once I have had that experience, how can I be content that my fellow beings should remain in ignorance? I have experienced its glory and its beauty. Hard is the doom to which thou bindest thy sons." Compared to the ecstasy that I have experienced, it is really hard. It's really hard on thy sons that they remain confined to this ignorance and suffer while on earth. Hard is the doom to which thou bindest thy sons. How long shall our spirits battle with the night and bear defeat and the brute yoke of death? We who are vessels of a deathless force and builders of the godhead of the race. So human being is a chosen species. We are the builders of the godhead of the race. How long shall this leader of the race continue to suffer like this? So Aswapati persists, and his persistence pays, and he secures from the Divine Mother the boon that what he is asking for would actually happen. And that boon comes on page 346. O strong forerunner, I have heard thy cry. One shall descend and break the iron law. So I have heard your prayer, and I have decided to agree to what you are asking for. And how shall that be accomplished? It shall be accomplished through one who shall descend and break the iron law. So one in human form shall descend on earth and will break the iron law. O strong forerunner, I have heard thy cry. One shall descend and break the iron law, change nature's doom by the lone spirit's power. And she shall use the spirit's power, just the spirit's power and nothing else, to change the present laws of nature, characterized by doom. These shall change, and these shall be changed by the one who shall descend on earth in human form, and she shall break this iron law. So he secures this boon, and towards the end of book 3, in a few lines, Sri Aurobindo sums up Aswapati's mission and quest and its fulfillment. A wanderer from the occult to invisible suns, accomplishing the fate of transient things, a god in the figure of the arisen beast, he raised his brow of conquest to the heavens, establishing the empire of the soul on matter and its bounded universe as on a solid rock in infinite seas. So he describes Aswapati as a wanderer from the occult invisible suns. And what did he accomplish? He accomplished the fate of transient things. He decided their fate, what their future shall be like. And how did he do it? By raising his brow of conquest to the heavens. And thereby he achieved the promise of the empire of the soul on matter. That is, the soul shall dominate matter, the soul shall guide the way the matter works, and its bounded universe, matter and its bounded universe, its universe which has all these limitations, that shall become a part of the empire of the soul as on a solid rock in infinite seas. So this empire will be as solid as a rock in an infinite sea. So this is the mission that the occult wanderer from the invisible suns accomplished. So that is the end of book 3, canto 4, and Aswapati's yoga.